What if strength was never what they told you it was? He was 5 the first time someone told him, "Don't cry, be a man." 7, when he learned that anger was more acceptable than sadness. By 13, he had memorized the rules: never flinch, never fold, never fall. And by the time he reached manhood, he could walk into any room with his chin up, chest out, voice steady, and yet feel completely disconnected from the person he once was. Because in the process of becoming who he was told to be, he forgot who he truly was. He learned to win arguments, but lost the ability to sit with silence. He learned to speak with force, but forgot how to listen to the still voice inside. He became strong by the world's definition, but weak in his own reflection. And maybe you've felt that too. So let me ask you, what if strength isn't loud? What if it isn't in dominance or volume or posture? What if real strength is silent, patient, rooted, and forged not by ego, but by discipline? This isn't a video about becoming alpha. It's not a lesson in power plays or social tactics. This is a return to the kind of strength that doesn't ask to be seen, because it knows exactly who it is. A journey through 5 core habits, drawn from the ancient fire of Stoic philosophy. 5 quiet revolutions that just might change the way you walk through this world. 1. Stillness before action. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't clench his fists. He didn't even flinch. The words had been sharp, meant to cut, delivered in a tone that asked for war. It happened in the middle of an ordinary room, under ordinary light, surrounded by ordinary people who didn't notice the line that had just been crossed. But he noticed, and for a moment, just one brief second, he could feel his entire body shift. That old fire, that urge to prove, to restore, to strike. It rose quickly, like a tide that had no intention of stopping. But he did. Not because he was weak, but because he had trained for this moment. He looked down, then up. He breathed, slowly, deliberately. 3 seconds of silence that changed the course of everything, and just like that, the tide receded. This wasn't surrender, it was sovereignty, because in a world where most men react by default, there's a quiet kind of power in the one who chooses to pause. He doesn't suppress the storm, he steps outside of it, just long enough to realize that the storm is not him. The Stoics believed that stillness is not what you find after strength, but the strength itself. That when emotion surges and instinct screams, the man who remains still, conscious, breathing, awake, is the one who carries the greatest weight. Not in his arms, but in his soul. Marcus Aurelius captured this wisdom in a single line. If someone does wrong, it's their problem. Your only job is to do right. Meditations. There is something radical in that, something unsettling even, because we've been taught to meet force with force, to match fire with fire, to never back down, never stay silent, never appear soft. But strength doesn't always sound like thunder. Sometimes it's the sound of a breath held, of a man who could respond but doesn't, not yet. That kind of restraint doesn't happen by accident. It's built, layer by quiet layer, and it begins with the most ancient of tools, your breath. The next time the world tries to pull you out of yourself, pause, just 3 seconds. Inhale deeply, feel your feet, loosen your jaw, name what's rising, but do not feed it. Let the emotion speak. but don't echo it. Instead, ask yourself, in that still space, what would the strongest version of me do here? It won't always be easy. It won't always feel fair, but it will always be worth it. Because a man who can hold himself in the heat of provocation is a man no one can easily manipulate. You don't need to win every battle. You just need to stop giving away your power to the ones who want to see you lose control. You don't need to suppress what you feel. You just need to decide who gets to see all of it. There's a sacred kind of masculinity in that decision, a return to center, a refusal to be predictable, a strength that's not forged in domination, but in discretion, not in how loudly you react, but in how quietly you stay rooted. So the next time you feel your chest tighten, your pride itch, your instincts clamor for retaliation, don't rise, don't explode, don't prove, just breathe. 3 seconds, stillness before action. And if you've ever practiced this, if there was a moment where you stood still when everything in you wanted to strike, share it below. Your story might become the mirror someone else needs to pause. But let's be honest, some emotions don't retreat so easily. Some battles begin, even after the breath. So what happens when stillness isn't enough to calm the storm inside? That's where we go next. 2. Tempered emotions. The strength of a man is shown in what he doesn't say. He felt it rise before the words were even spoken, the kind of heat that starts in your chest and rushes upward, pressing behind the eyes, tightening the throat, making the room smaller and your body louder. The man across the table had said something cruel, not by accident, not in jest, but deliberately, in front of others, in a tone that said, "I dare you to react." For a fraction of a second he almost did, almost stood up, almost raised his voice, almost let the rage do the talking. And who would have blamed him? The comment was personal, the sting was real, and silence would have felt like surrender. But just before the dam broke, he caught himself, not because the anger vanished, but because he had learned that anger is not the problem. It's the loss of direction that follows. He exhaled. Not the kind of exhale that signals defeat, but the kind that saves you from becoming someone you'll regret remembering. In that moment, he didn't suppress his emotions. He tempered them, held them up to the light of his values, refused to hand over his agency to a stranger's provocation. That man walked away thinking he had won the moment. But the truth was, he had only exposed his own instability. The one who didn't respond had won something far more permanent, his self-respect. The Stoics didn't teach men to become robots. They didn't teach emotional suppression. What they taught was mastery, of space, of awareness, of choosing how and when to respond so that your words didn't betray your character. Epictetus, whose entire philosophy was forged through the fire of hardship, once wrote, "You always have the power not to respond." And those words remain as relevant now as they were 2,000 years ago. Because the fire within us can either be a forge or an explosion. And we get to decide which it becomes. Tempered emotions are not a sign of weakness. They are proof of inner craftsmanship. You don't walk through this world untouched, unfazed, or unaffected. But you learn to become unmoved by the wrong things. You recognize that emotions are messengers, not masters. You listen, you observe, but you don't obey them blindly. There is an art to this, and like any art, it requires practice. The next time someone says something that lands wrong, pause. not to suppress, but to watch. What rose inside you? Where did it begin? Was it anger or wounded pride? Was it insult or insecurity being touched? Name it. Don't judge it. Just witness it. And in that observation, begin the process of transmutation. Turn your pain into information, your reaction into reflection, your impulse into clarity. The man who reacts to everything is predictable. The man who chooses when and whether to respond is powerful. His silence isn't a void, it's a filter. His words aren't delayed, they're distilled. And this matters more than we admit, because life will test you in public, in boardrooms, in family dinners, in grocery store parking lots. You won't always get to choose the time or place, but you can always choose your posture, not just your body, but your mind, your energy, your edge, and what you protect above all else should never be your pride, but your peace. So the next time someone tries to drag you into a reaction, stop asking, "What should I say back?" and start asking, "Who do I want to be in this moment?" That one question might save you years of apologizing for the man you became in the heat of it all. Because if stillness before action is the first pillar of inner strength, then emotional clarity is the foundation it rests on. Together, they build a man who is solid, not just in silence, but in motion, who can walk into chaos and remain composed, who can feel deeply and still choose wisely. But here's the hard truth. Just because you control your emotions doesn't mean others will respect your restraint. Sometimes your stillness will frustrate them. Your silence will expose them. Your refusal to be reactive will be mistaken for weakness. And not every battle is worth fighting. Not every opponent deserves your energy. So what happens when someone pushes again and again, not just to provoke you, but to pull you into their game? That's where we turn next. 3. Earned boundaries. You don't have to apologize for protecting your energy. He could feel it even before the words left his mouth. That quiet weight that comes when you're about to say no to someone who expects you to say yes. It wasn't a dramatic moment, just a simple invitation. An old friend from college reaching out, asking if he'd join them for a weekend away, drinks, late nights. That kind of energy he used to swim in effortlessly. But now, he hesitated, not because he didn't care. Not because he looked down on them, but because something inside him no longer felt at home in that rhythm. He had changed. Slower mornings, early runs, time alone that actually felt full. He liked who he was becoming, and he didn't want to lose that peace for the sake of familiarity. So, he replied with kindness, a soft, "Thank you for thinking of me, but I'll pass this time." The response came fast, and not kindly. "Oh, too good for us now. Must be nice to be so spiritual." "You've changed, man." He read the words twice, then 3 times. That old reflex flared again, the one that wanted to explain, to defend, to justify his decision with enough clarity so they wouldn't misunderstand him. But then he didn't. He set the phone down, walked outside, breathed in the quiet of a life he had chosen, not inherited, and for once, he didn't chase their approval. He didn't rewrite his no into a softer maybe. He just let it stand. And in doing so, something in him stood taller too. There's a myth that strength is always loud, that it roars in confrontation or flexes in resistance. But some of the deepest strength a man can carry is the quiet confidence to say no without guilt and without need for applause, to draw a boundary not with bitterness but with clarity, not to push people away, but to stop abandoning himself in order to be kept close. The Stoics knew this deeply. Seneca once wrote, "Don't explain yourself to those who don't seek to understand." And this isn't coldness, it's wisdom, because when you over-explain your no to people who are only looking for a yes, you end up negotiating your values just to avoid discomfort. You end up reshaping your boundaries to accommodate their reactions, but a boundary that constantly needs defending isn't a boundary, it's a plea for permission. You don't owe everyone access, you don't owe everyone your energy, and no one, no matter how long you've known them, has the right to be offended when you choose alignment over approval. The problem is, most of us were taught to confuse kindness with compliance. We were raised to keep the peace, to be agreeable, to make others comfortable, even when it costs us our center. But peace that demands your silence is not peace, it's performance. And no man becomes whole by constantly rehearsing someone else's expectations. That's why boundaries are not selfish, they're sacred. They are the invisible architecture of your inner integrity. The quiet lines that say, "This is who I am, this is where I stop performing, and this is where I begin to live honestly." So here's your practice this week. Write down 3 things you need to say no to without explanation. It could be a person, a habit, a situation, a version of you that no longer fits. Write it, then say it. And when the discomfort rises, and it will, let it rise. Let it pass. And remind yourself that clarity without cruelty is still love. And if this message hits a nerve, if you've been saying yes too often to things that leave you drained, take a small step. Say no once this week, even if it feels unnatural. And let that no be your declaration, that you're learning to stand beside yourself, even if it means standing alone. What's one thing you need to start saying no to? Drop it in the comments. Let this be your first step in reclaiming your energy. Because boundaries aren't built in a single day. They're earned over time, one honest no at a time. And the more you practice, the more natural it feels. Not because the world changes, but because you do. Because you stop needing to soften yourself to be understood. Because you realize anyone who loves you doesn't need to be convinced to respect you. And when you no longer need to explain, when you stop shrinking to fit someone else's comfort, you don't become distant, you become whole. And that, more than anything, is how a man matures, in silence, with grace, and without apology. And when you've tasted that kind of wholeness, you'll protect it like sacred ground, because it is. And when you no longer feel the need to explain yourself, you begin to grow in ways no one sees, but everyone feels. 4. Endurance in solitude. No one claps. You still show up. It's 4:03 a.m. The house is silent. No notifications, no messages, no audience. The floor beneath his feet is cold, and the world outside still sleeps. Blanketed in that quiet darkness, only a few ever wake early enough to witness. He pours water into a kettle, folds his blanket, pulls on the same pair of running shoes he's worn for months. No music, no pre-workout anthem. Just breathe, just discipline. Just the sound of a man keeping a promise no one else will ever know about. There's no applause. No one is documenting his dedication. No one is waiting for proof of it. But he moves anyway, step after quiet step. Not because someone is watching, but because he is. This is the kind of strength that doesn't trend. the kind that doesn't get shared or posted or celebrated, the kind you build when you do the hard thing not once, but repeatedly when the world forgets to notice. And that's exactly why it matters, because a man who can endure the silence of effort without needing it to echo in praise, that man is dangerous in the best way. He is free. It's easy to stay consistent when there's recognition, when there's encouragement, when the room lights up every time you speak and people nod as you move. But real endurance, the kind that molds character instead of image, happens in solitude. In the hours no one tracks, in the effort no one affirms, in the journey where the only one cheering is your own heartbeat. Epictetus, who lived through exile and enslavement before becoming one of the most respected Stoic teachers, wrote, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." And that is the secret. You build yourself in private before the world ever sees a glimpse of who you are becoming. We live in a time where visibility is confused with value, where people think if it's not posted, it didn't happen. But the most powerful things about you will never be visible. The strength to stay sober, the courage to be kind when bitterness feels easier, the integrity to show up day after day for something that may never be acknowledged. These are not gestures, they are foundations. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be loud. You just have to be consistent, especially when no one sees it, especially when no one claps, because your worth was never meant to depend on echo. It was meant to depend on alignment between who you are and who you're becoming. Here's the truth most men learn too late. Your private habits shape your public reality. The conversations you have with yourself at dawn, the standards you hold in silence, the little decisions you make when no one's around, those are the bricks in the foundation. That is where self-respect is born. So this week, commit to one practice, one quiet promise, one act of discipline no one needs to know about but you. A 30-day commitment to something small, a 5-minute stretch, a daily reading, a cold shower, a morning run. Not because it makes you superior, but because it reminds you that your strength is yours to build, yours to earn, yours to honor, even in darkness. There will be mornings you won't want to rise, days when the silence feels too heavy, nights when you wonder if it even matters. And those are the days that matter most, because anyone can show up when it's easy, but a strong man shows up when it's not. Not because he's proving anything, but because that's who he said he would be. And if you're reading this, nodding quietly, thinking of your own 4 a.m., whatever form it takes, I see you, or rather I don't. But I know the shape of that effort. I know the way it feels to move forward with no spotlight. And I know it builds something unshakable, a center that no chaos can breach. Because when the world forgets to applaud, and you keep showing up anyway, you are no longer moved by noise. You are moved by meaning. You are no longer chasing approval. You are cultivating alignment. You are no longer trying to be seen. You are learning to see yourself clearly and respect what you see. And when you no longer need an audience, when your value is no longer auctioned off to external affirmation, something inside you changes. You begin to glow quieter, move deeper, stand firmer. And that's when the next level reveals itself. Because what happens when you no longer need anyone to notice? What happens when the fire no longer asks for fuel, but becomes its own source of light? 5. Letting go of validation. You don't need to win to be free. He could have stayed, could have kept arguing, could have made his point sharper, louder, more undeniable. It was a heated room, voices bouncing off walls, ideas clashing like swords, egos circling one another in a battle that was no longer about truth, but about who would get the last word. He stood in the middle of it, watching it all unfold, feeling the tension rise like steam inside his chest. But instead of fighting to win, he did something unexpected. He let go, not out of weakness, not out of fear, but because in that moment he realized that walking away was not retreat, it was liberation. There's a part of every man that wants to be understood, that wants to be right, that wants the final word, the nod of approval, the invisible gold star that says, "You did it, you proved yourself." But there comes a moment, sooner or later, when you realize that chasing validation is a loop that never ends. The more you seek it, the more you need it. And the more you need it, the more control you surrender to those who can give or withhold it. That's the hidden cost of needing to win. It keeps you tethered. You become a puppet dancing for the applause of people who may never clap. You stay in rooms you've outgrown. You enter arguments that lead nowhere. You trade your peace for the fleeting satisfaction of being right. And in doing so, you forget that real strength isn't about dominating others, it's about being free from their judgment. Epictetus, whose wisdom was shaped not in comfort, but in captivity, wrote simply, "Freedom is the only worthy goal in life." And he wasn't talking about external freedom. He meant the kind of inner freedom that allows you to walk away from noise without explaining yourself. The kind of peace that no longer depends on who agrees with you. The kind of self-respect that doesn't ask for permission to exist. To let go of validation is to release the chains you didn't realize you were wearing. It is to stop performing for invisible audiences. To stop rearranging your truth so it fits better into someone else's expectations. It is to return to yourself, not as a reaction to others, but as a remembrance of who you were before the world told you who to be. And that's not easy, because letting go doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop needing. You don't harden, you clarify. You don't become indifferent, you become rooted. You still show up, you still speak your truth, but you do it without gripping for outcome, without begging for agreement, without turning your presence into a transaction for attention. Try this. The next time you feel the urge to explain yourself, to defend your worth, to fight for acknowledgement, pause, ask yourself, what part of me still wants to be seen? And instead of feeding it with noise, meet it with compassion. Breathe into that space. Say the sentence like a meditation, "I don't need to win, I just need to keep myself." Repeat it slowly until it sinks deeper than the need to be right. Because truth doesn't always win the argument, but it always wins the moment you stop betraying yourself to prove it. And when that shift happens, when you walk away from the validation loop, you don't become invisible, you become unshakable. You begin to radiate a kind of calm confidence that doesn't shout, doesn't prove, doesn't ask. It just is. And people notice, not because you demanded it, but because something about you has stopped chasing. That's when you know you're close to something rare. That sacred ground where silence feels stronger than speech, where stillness holds more power than persuasion, where your identity is no longer written in the eyes of others, but etched quietly into the way you walk, the way you pause, the way you no longer need to be understood to feel whole. What part of you still seeks validation from the world? Name it. Own it. Let's outgrow it. Together. Because the moment you release the need to be approved, you begin living with a new kind of weightlessness. And in that space, you don't need to fight to win anymore. You're no longer playing someone else's game. You're finally walking your own path. And that's when something in you begins to shine. Quietly, steadily, unmistakably. In a way no one can measure, but no one can ignore. 6. Reflection. The strong man is already inside you. You don't need to become someone else. You just need to return. The world keeps telling you to transform, to become tougher, louder, leaner, richer. Every ad whispers the same lie with different language, that who you are is not enough, that the man you're meant to be is somewhere out there, far away, waiting on the other side of more effort, more hustle, more self-denial. But what if none of that is true? What if you've spent years chasing a version of strength that was never missing, only buried? You don't need to become someone else. You need to come back to who you were before the noise, before the pressure, before you started reshaping yourself to be more acceptable, more impressive, more approved. There was a time, maybe years ago, maybe buried under quiet disappointments, when you moved slowly and saw clearly. When your silence wasn't a sign of insecurity, but a sanctuary. When you could feel your feet on the ground and trust your instincts without second-guessing your worth. That version of you didn't vanish. He didn't die. He's just been waiting. Beneath the urgency, beneath the exhaustion, beneath the performance. And returning to him isn't about grand gestures. It's about subtraction. Peeling back everything the world told you you needed to be until you meet yourself again in the stillness and remember, your strength was never out there. It was always here. You are not weak because you're tired. You are not broken because you're unsure. You are not behind because you're quiet. Sometimes the most powerful men are simply the ones who remember where they started and finally stop running. So take a breath. Come home, not to who you could be, but to who you already are, beneath everything you thought you had to become. Because the strong man isn't out there. He's in you. He always has been. 7. Practice. Build your S.T.E.E.L code. Strong men don't make noise, they leave an impression. Now that you've walked the path, it's time to stand in it. You've heard the stories, you've felt the philosophy, you've remembered who you are underneath the noise. But none of it becomes yours until it's lived. Not in theory, not in intention, but in repetition, in silence, in days that leave no evidence, except for the man you're becoming. S.T.E.E.L was never a slogan. It's not a label. It's a way of holding yourself, a structure you return to when the world pulls you in every direction. It is your personal code. Stillness before action. You pause before reacting, not to hide, but to see clearly. Tempered emotions. You master your energy, so it serves you, not sabotages you. Earned boundaries. You say no without guilt. You protect your values without apology. Endurance in solitude. You stay the course, even when no one claps. Letting go of validation. You move forward, not for praise, but for purpose. Now, make it real. For the next 5 days, choose one letter of the code each day, one idea, One habit, one commitment. On day 1, practice stillness. Begin your day with a 3-minute silence before speaking to anyone. Breathe, observe. Let your thoughts settle before your actions begin. On day 2, watch your emotions. Keep a journal. Every time something triggers you, don't just feel it, write it, name it. Track your ability to respond instead of react. On day 3, say no to something that drains you. Set a boundary, not to punish but to preserve. Journal how it felt and what part of you resisted. On day 4, do something hard in private. No posting, no applause. Just a quiet act of effort, because you said you would. And on day 5, release the need to be seen. Do one good thing anonymously. Remind yourself your value isn't proven, it's embodied. At the end of each day, write, not for grammar, not for anyone else to read, just for you. What did you notice? Where did you slip? Where did you surprise yourself? These aren't just tasks, they're anchors. And if you commit, you'll notice something subtle but undeniable. A shift in posture, a steadiness in breath, a silence that feels like steel. And when someone asks what changed, don't explain. Just keep showing up. Because strong men don't make noise, they leave an impression. You've made it to the end, but this isn't a finish line. It's not about who you've become. It's about who you've stopped running from. The strongest man in the room is rarely the loudest, rarely the one in command, and never the one begging to be seen. He is the one who no longer needs to win every battle, because he understands the only real victory is staying loyal to his own code. He doesn't chase validation or argue to be right. He doesn't shrink to be liked, nor does he explode to be feared. Instead, he moves quietly, rooted in values no one sees but him. His strength isn't performative, it's consistent. His presence doesn't demand attention, it simply holds it. These 5 habits aren't tactics, they're foundations. They don't make you alpha, they make you whole. And when practiced, not to impress others, but to stay in alignment with your own truth, they form something few men ever find, a peace that doesn't fade when the noise begins. And here's the part you may not have expected. The strong man isn't a distant ideal you have to chase. He's not out there, waiting to be built from scratch. He is already within you, buried beneath performance, fear, and all the stories you were told about what a man should be. You don't have to become him. You just have to stop walking away from him. So let me ask you, which habit will you begin today, even if no one's watching? Drop it in the comments. Let this be your first step, not toward performance, but toward presence. And if you're building yourself in silence, like, share, and subscribe, because you're not behind, you're not invisible, and you're certainly not alone. You're just becoming. How much longer will you wait before you demand the best for yourself? Epictetus.